Hello everybody, my name is Simmy. Welcome to my channel, Class in the Cloud. On this channel, you'll find tips and suggestions to help you get started and make a success of your online teaching and online learning journey. If you are new here, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear where in the world you are teaching. And while you're there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss my next video. Today's video came as a special request, and it is Class in the Cloud's first teacher training tutorial. So, welcome to Learning Education's first training for 2021, presented by Class in the Cloud. Today's video is all about reading classes, how to teach ESL reading online, making it engaging, fun, and interactive. If you want to skip all the introduction paraphernalia and jump right into the training, timestamp below. But before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Simmy. My students call me Teacher Simmy. I live in South Africa in the beautiful Cape Winelands. I am a wife, a mother, and a qualified teacher. I have a BA in sports science, psychology, and public development management, as well as a postgraduate certificate in education, and of course a TEFL certificate. I've been teaching English online for 3 years, sustainably and successfully. And today I want to share some of the things that I've learned with regards to reading classes with you. So stay tuned, and once again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next tutorial. As mentioned, welcome to Class in the Cloud's first teacher training tutorial. Learning Education Teacher Training, January 2021. And today's tutorial is all about teaching reading classes in the online ESL classroom. In this tutorial, I'm going to cover 5 main points. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why should we teach ESL reading. Then, we're going to talk about the type of ESL texts that you might find when teaching online reading classes. We're going to look at the 5 components of reading and how reading progresses from early phonics right through thorough comprehension of reading texts. Number 4, we're going to look at the 7 strategies of a highly effective reader. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to incorporate some of those strategies or teach those strategies to our students. Number 5, we're going to get to the nitty-gritty of teaching English ESL reading classes online. And we're going to look at some examples of what activities could look like to make the class both fun and engaging. So, let's jump right in. Point number 1. Why teach ESL reading in the first place? Developing reading fluency in any language is a long process, and breaking this process down into manageable steps can make language learning both fun, interesting, and even engaging. Reading is an important part of any language skill set. If you can't read, you can't write. So after speaking, reading should come naturally. It is a very important way to engage and learn about your world. Learning to read is an important building block for language learning. As I said already, if you can't read, you will battle to write. If you can't read, you can't write. If you can't write, you can't express yourself in a written form, which in a way also inhibits your communication processes. Reading is fundamental in learning to use sentence structures correctly, especially if you're speaking a foreign language, and it is closely intertwined, as I said, learning the written language as well. Reading is the cornerstone of language acquisition in any language. Reading develops the mind. Learning to read opens the world for the student or the child. It helps them to learn about cultures, history, societies, to see the world in a different way, both real and imagined. Reading can challenge you in the present. It can teach you to reflect on the past, but it can also shoot you into the imaginative world of the future. Reading expands the student's vocabulary base and enhances fluency. Reading allows the student to engage with different types of text, allowing the student to learn and engage with new vocabulary, to use that vocabulary in the correct context with the correct pronunciation and sentence structures. Next, we're going to talk about types of reading text that you might come across when teaching English ESL reading online. Okay, so let's have a look at the 4 reading texts that I have found in doing my research. Number 1, you have extensive reading. Now, extensive reading is the reading that the student will do by themselves. It is explorative reading. They read books that they enjoy. It is reading to enhance speed, fluency, and everyday vocabulary and pronunciation. This is not necessarily the reading you will find in the online classroom. Next, we have intensive reading. Now, this is the reading that you will mainly find in the classroom. This is reading for comprehension, reading with attention to detail, listening to and speaking about the text, where you perform specific learning tasks and have specific objectives to what you are reading. Some of the examples might be skimming the text to find specific details, answering true or false statements, filling in the gaps to create a summary of the text you are reading, matching headings to paragraphs, or putting the story into the correct order. All of those are suitable activities when your main goal is intensive reading. The next form of reading will be communicative reading. Now, this you might find in your higher level students. This is when you read for communication. You read for research. You read the text for the purpose of discussion. So if you are teaching debating classes or drama classes in form of teaching English, you will come across this reading quite often. You read to act or role play. You read to debate and have open-ended discussions. And you also read to interview, ask and inquire. The next form of reading is academic reading. This again is self-reading. Even though you might find some academic texts in the curriculums that you teach. So for example, you might have some geography, you might have some history, you might have some maths that you come across where it's a reading lesson, but to teach the vocabulary of that particular subject in English, so that they can learn the English terminologies that they need to engage with that subject in English. So examples of those type of reading texts would be textbooks, dictionaries, encyclopedias, journal articles, or any academic resource you might find online. Now, David A. Russell had a very nice quote, and I put it at the bottom of the slide. He said, "The paramount goal gained from reading are meaning, comprehension, and understanding of ideas and their communication." So the purpose of reading is to absorb and to give back. And we've already come to point number 3. Can you believe it? All right, we're almost getting to the nitty-gritty of how to teach reading online. So number 3, we're going to look at reading progression and learning, right? The 5 components of reading and learning to read. Number 1 will be your phonics, or as I like to call them, the ABACA lessons. These are for the teacher probably the most boring, okay? But it is fundamental for the student to learn to read. Phonics is one of the early reading skills that a student would learn. This is your level 0, 1, and even 2 students. It's the process of mapping the sounds in words to written letters. Grasping printed letters that represent specific spoken sounds and words. Teaching learners to link the letters to the sounds, and this is known as the alphabetic principle. Basically saying that apple would be your first letter. Okay, next will be your phonetic awareness. Now your student is familiar with the alphabet. A is for apple. B is for is for ball. Okay, so they are now aware of the sounds. Now they need to learn to develop through learning specific sounds and combinations of sounds or phonemes, syllables and words. So apple, 2 syllables. Okay, they are also learning the ability to hear, identify and manipulate individual sounds of a word. So for example, manipulate, 4 syllables, but each have different sounds. Or let's have another word, car, k-a-r, car. Okay, So that process takes a lot of time and practice and is fundamental to learning to read correctly. The fundamental key skill that needs to be acquired in this stage of learning is to order and learn how to read. So how to read a word and to sound the words out. For example, as on the PPT here, I have rat, rat. You get the picture. The third phase of learning to read is learning vocabulary. This is increasing the vocabulary base and is a fundamental part of the reading process. If you don't know words, if you don't have a vocabulary base, you cannot read. The more words you can recognize, understand, and know, the greater your understanding of the text will be, therefore making reading more enjoyable and more meaningful. Because you're no longer reading gibberish, you're actually starting to visualize in your mind what the words mean. The way that you practice this is by reading a wide variety of texts and to build a good and steady vocabulary as you practice to read. Usually, if you have a reading curriculum, they will build on previous vocabulary and the reading will get more difficult as the levels progress. But it is important for the student to continue to read and to read out loud because they need to verbalize it as much as they need to recognize it. Number 4, now we're heading towards our higher level students. We are now level 5, 6, and reading fluency is something that comes after developing a good phonetic awareness. In other words, you can sound the words out and now you've got a good vocabulary base, you've got good phonics skills, and you've done regular reading practice, both listening and speaking it out loud. And this is essential to reading fluency. In my personal opinion, listening to reading is very important, especially if you're learning a foreign language. Listening to reading, you hear the pronunciation, you hear the inflections, you hear the stresses, you hear the pauses. You learn how to speak a language by listening to how it is read. A fluent reader is able to quickly span between recognizing a word and understanding the meaning. So, for example, a good activity here would be pictures and words. So you have your vocabulary-based words that are going to be in your reading text, and they're going to match the word to the pictures so they can visualize the words so that when they are reading, they can visualize it in their mind while they are reading. You'll also find in your early level readers that they will actually have a picture in the place of the word. Okay, because the student will much quicker recognize what the word is by the picture than actually having to read it, helping the brain to link visual and words. The more we read, the better our understanding becomes alongside speed and accuracy. Speed and accuracy comes after all the others. You can be a good internal reader, but you can really struggle with reading out loud. And we need to be aware of this with some of our students, where they can most likely read, but because of the pronunciation gap, or because of fear of pronouncing it incorrectly, or because it sounds funny to my ears when I speak a different language, we need to be very sensitive to maybe they can understand what they're reading, but reading out loud is very daunting. Which brings me to my final point on this, is that when teaching reading classes, be careful not to only let the children read out loud. Reading out loud is more of a pronunciation exercise than it is a reading exercise. When you learn to read, it is not just about how you say the words, but also how you understand what you're reading. Understanding being the more important aspect. 3.3, and we've come to the fifth and final part of learning to read, and that is reading for comprehension, reading for understanding, being a great reader, which is the goal of learning to read and for teaching reading lessons. So how do you recognize good comprehension in a student? Firstly, a student who has good comprehension is deeply engaged in the text they are reading. They can visualize the characters, the settings in their mind. They can hear the dialogue, they can imagine details beyond the page. They can make real-life connections, and they can follow the sequence and anticipate what's going to happen next. So here you will have sequencing words as in, firstly, this happened, and after that, this was the big event. Next came the drama, and finally, they made peace. Knowing how to follow a sequence and the sequencing words is one of the key light bulb moments when you know that your student is actually comprehending what they're reading. When you can think about a text you're reading, internally debate it, analyze what is happening in the text, and able to share an emotional journey with the characters in the text, you are reading with comprehension. When you can easily gain knowledge from the text you are reading, and you know what is happening in the text, you can follow what is happening in the text, and you can link it to previous knowledge, you have reached comprehension. And lastly, if your student can share and show a deep and broad understanding of what is being read, internally reflect, share back what they've learned, and make real-life connections to think deeply and to engage with the text, you've reached your goal. Number 4, I'm looking at the 7 strategies of a highly effective reader. And I found this beautiful chart on the All About Adolescent Literacy. So this is not my chart, okay? I am just borrowing it for purpose of sharing what I've learned, okay? And this is important to what I'm going to share next. Right, so the 7 strategies of reading are activating, inferring, monitoring and clarifying, questioning, search selecting, summarizing, and visual organizing. And you want to try and incorporate at least 5 of these strategies into every reading lesson. Not always practical, but there are very creative ways in which you can do this. And if you can actually incorporate 5 out of 7 of these strategies into your reading classes, your learners will be engaged and they will walk away from the lesson feeling confident and knowing that they've actually learned something and achieved something in terms of their reading skill set. So let's look at these one by one very quickly. Activating, like I said, priming the cognitive pump. So this will be for your introduction, and it will be when you are engaging previous knowledge and experiences from long-term memory and applying that to what you're about to read. The second one is inferring, bringing together the spoken text, the written text, and the unspoken aspects, and making guesses about what you're going to read. A good activity like this could be to look at the front cover of the book. What do you see? What do you think the story is about? Making inferences, making good guesses. Number 3, monitoring and clarifying. Basically, thinking about how and what you are reading and the purpose for your reading. Is it a fairy tale? What is the purpose of the text? Is it a magazine article? Is it a chapter book? What is the purpose? What was the purpose of the author when writing this text? Next, you have your questioning. Now, this is a big part. This you can incorporate in every single reading lesson, and that is basically engaging with dialogues with each other and the teachers, Q&As, multiple choice, debating, talking about the text, asking questions about the text. Why did the author write this? Why is it in this setting? Why did the character react that way? And this also brings real-life connections when you start asking questions about the text. Number 5, searching and selecting. Now this is very difficult to bring into a reading lesson unless you want to see maybe playing a video as part of this. But basically it is bringing other sources into the lesson that will clarify what you are reading about and basically clear up any misunderstandings. So visual aids could probably be one of those, or a video. Enhancing what you're reading, look at it like reading being the picture and bring in resources to color it in. Number 6, summarizing. This is something that you can bring into every single lesson that you teach, whether offline or online. It is taking the text and giving it back in your own words, or taking the text and writing it out in a shorter version. Summarizing is a very important comprehension skill, giving good feedback to the teacher as to did the student really understand what was happening in the text. The last one is visualizing and organizing. This is again another one that you can bring into every single lesson, and that is aiding the students with visual cues, helping them to organize the text. So an example here could be putting the story in the correct order, using sequencing words, matching paragraphs to headings, right? Organizing your text, and it is also an important building block skill for learning how to write correctly. Number 5, and we've come to the nitty-gritty of how to teach reading. And I hope you found this tutorial interesting so far, and that it has been insightful, and that you can apply something of what you've learned to your reading classes already. But here we go with the practical aspect of this teacher training tutorial. I'd like to compare a reading lesson, or any lesson for that matter, to sports training. So when you are sports training, there are 3 main aspects of your training session. There's your warm-up, you wake your body up, warm up your muscles, you engage muscle memory, and you get ready to move. Then you have your main training session where you drill the skills, you learn new skills, you work hard, and you push your body to new limits. Lastly, you will then warm down. You will cool your body down, you'll bring your heart rate down, and you'll move slowly and allow your body to adapt to the movements that you've done and to bring everything back to equilibrium. So that is how you would do a sports training session, but you can apply the same principle to reading, and I'm going to show you how now. Teaching reading classes has 3 main stages, in my opinion. Okay, so first stage is your warm-up or your pre-reading section. In this section, you will get the mind ready to learn. You will introduce the topic that the text is about, and you will engage prior knowledge. There are many activities you can do as a warm-up. Most of the popular one would be a free talk where you'll have a picture and the children will discuss what they see, or you can have the front cover of the book or a picture out of the text and they need to make inferences of what they think the text might be about. Warming up the mind to get ready to read. You can also incorporate vocabulary in this part of the lesson. Now, it is important to note that this is not a vocabulary lesson. This is not a pronunciation lesson. This is a reading lesson. So it is absolutely pointless to spend 20 minutes drilling vocabulary. The main purpose of a reading lesson is for the student to engage with the text, to understand the text, and be able to give back what they've received so that you can know that they've comprehended what they've read. The second part of your lesson would be where you would bring in your learning objectives, your reading, and your activities. Now, something that I would recommend and that I have found has made a huge difference is that if I read to the students and then the student has a chance to read to me. I have found that that strategy has increased pronunciation, has increased reading fluency, and even comprehension, because the first time the student engages with the text is not the first time they read the text. They shadow read and then they read out loud. And that made a huge difference in their confidence as well as their reading skills. So in stage 2, you will drill the reading skills. Okay? Reading skills would be looking for the details in the text or looking for sequencing words. It could be learning new vocabulary and maybe even looking for synonyms and antonyms for the vocabulary that are being used. It could be summarizing the text. There are so many different activities, but the main activity in this part of stage 2 is reading. The third part of your lesson is your wrap-up or your post-reading. This is after you've read the text, and at this point, your students should be able to summarize what they've learned. You should be able to tick off the objectives that should have been met in the lesson according to your lesson plan. But most importantly, in this part of the lesson, your student needs to be making real-life connections with what they've read. They should have internalized what they read, reflect on what they read, and even relate to the characters in the text. So your wrap-up is basically your comprehension check. 5.3. One of the strategies that I have learned on my journey is what I like to call the K&L strategy. Now, this strategy I actually picked up from my daughter's homeschooling platform. She uses a platform called Time for Learning, and the English lessons, believe it or not, are presented by cartoon characters. It's very sweet and very cool. But there's a specific formula that they use when presenting each and every lesson. And I'd like to share this with you because it has really made the world of a difference when I started applying it to my reading lessons that I teach. Now, the first letter K stands for know, what you know. The letter N stands for what you need to know. And little L stands for what you've learned. So warm up, reading activities, and wrap up. So let's look at some activities that we can incorporate in each of these stages. Number 1, what you know. So here you are tapping into previous knowledge. You can free talk about the topic. You can describe pictures, memories, or events. And you can even show a video to the student. Basically introducing the topic and finding where their level of understanding is in terms of what they're going to be reading about. Letter N, what you need to know. Now here is the base of your lesson. Basically, you're going to listen to the text, you're going to read the text. You're going to get the student engaged with the text. You're going to learn new vocabulary, teach new reading skills. For example, finding, linking and sequencing words, summarizing the text in your own words, drawing attention to key points and key details in the text. You can use visual aids like a world map, and you basically want to answer the questions who, what, when, where, why, and how, relevant to the text. Lastly, you want to look at what your students have learned. You want to check comprehension. What have you learned? So you want response and comprehension check in this part of your lesson. This could be open-ended Q&A, making real-life connections, giving verbal feedback, role play, drawing pictures, summarizing the text, filling in the missing words, or group discussion. Okay, there are so many ways in which you can wrap up a lesson to ensure that comprehension was achieved. The K&L formula, when teaching any lesson for that matter, gives meaning, aids memory, and enhances understanding of the text. Right, so when you're teaching a reading lesson, this is probably what you would come across. It'll be a text, maybe 5 or 6 slides of reading. So it'll be reading, Q&A, reading, Q&A, reading, Q&A. And there might be a vocabulary slide, there might be a wrap-up slide, but there's not a lot to work with. So you really have to pull a rabbit out of a hat to make this lesson engaging, interesting, and exciting. And there are several ways in which you can do this. Right, so here we are. How do I teach reading classes online? How do I keep all my students engaged? How do I make sure that they all leave with a sense of achievement and that they've all actually comprehended what we've read? Let's look at a few examples, and I really hope that you would walk away from this tutorial feeling confident that your teaching skills have been added to. The first thing that I would suggest is that to create your board, your whiteboard or your blackboard. In this case, we're using ClassIn as a teaching platform. So all of my examples are on the ClassIn platform. On the board, you can see that this lesson was a reading lesson about artists and paintings. There are about 4 different texts, each with the Q&A, and they had the painting, the artist, and a little bit about what the painting was about. What I did to engage my visual student and to keep the students interested is I created a board that simulated art. Right, so I had paint splashes, and in our introductory what do you know part of the lesson, I actually had the actual painting with the name of the artist and the name of the painting, and they had to do a little Q&A based on what they can see. Okay, so immediately they know they're reading about art. Right, so create a board that is visually stimulating and exciting to look at. Here we are in class in, and as you can see, I've set up my board for, what's the theme? Vacation time. And it's all about camping. And the piece they're going to read in this story is about a mom and her daughter who went camping, and it rained the whole weekend. They only had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It was a complete disaster, and the mom feels bad, but the daughter's happy because she got to play on a tablet all weekend. Okay, right, so there are many activities. I want to focus on this one here quickly, right? So this I use as a post-reading activity. Basically, you've got the summarizing pieces and you want to put the story in the right order. So let's have a look. Let's see what happened. Number one, first, Jenny and her mother went camping, but Jenny thinks camping is no fun. It rains all weekend and they have to stay in their tent. On the way home, Mom says Jenny was right, it wasn't not fun. But Jenny, on the other hand, had a great time. Okay, so here you can use sequencing words first, secondly, then, or first, after that, then, finally. And putting the story in the right order is a very good activity for comprehension. Here we have another board, and the topic is Welcome to the Future. Right, and there's a whole series on this level about the future and what the future is like. And so this particular reading piece was about communication technology. Now this is I think it's a level 8 group, and they already have quite a solid vocabulary base. So there's no need to drill vocabulary. However, we can use the vocabulary as part of the introduction or tapping into prior knowledge activity. Right, so they have to pick a box and then they have to ask and answer each other about what's in the box. So for example, I pick a box, I delete the box. What is in the box? How would you use it? Do we still use it today? Will we still use it 100 years from now? And every box has different things in it, as you can see. We even have a male pigeon, okay? And they have to then engage with the pictures, talk about the pictures, which then sets the stage for what they're going to be reading about technology today, yesterday, and in the future. In the same lesson, we also have what do you use to do the following, okay? And here I can take out the dice, right? And I can also use the responder. Now again, this isn't a tutorial for class in, but I'm trying to show you where you can use some of the tools, right? So I've taken the pictures out of the PPT, and the students now need to tell me what technology they can use for the various parts. So student 1 will roll the dice, and then we will pick picture 2. And what will you use to call your friends? Boop. And the student who taps the button first gets to answer. All right, very nice activity. You're using 2 classing tools and you're getting all the students to engage in this activity. So here we are still in the technology theme. All right, so quite a few lessons with the same topic. All right, but in this reading lesson, they read about languages and how languages around the world are going extinct, right? So what I like to do in reading lessons, specifically when they talk about different countries, a lot of the students aren't familiar with the English names of the countries, and students in general don't know the world map, okay? So it is a good way to revise the 7 continents, okay? And the purpose of this activity is that each student has a block. So if I'm the student, I am going to North America. Let's say I'm going to North America. I'm going to bring the flag to North America. Boom, that's where I am. And the official language in the USA is English, but there are 350 other languages spoken in the USA. After English, most people speak Spanish and Chinese. Okay, so and then they have to read that. Now I use this as an introduction activity, right? because these countries and flags were on the PPT. Right. Then they read the text, and I showed a couple of videos in between. At the end of reading the text, this is a reflecting activity where they now get to reflect on what they've read, and they get to make real-life connections by putting it on the board on the real world. Right. So, for example, let's go to Mexico, right? There we go. And the student drags to Mexico. And they say, Mexico, there is an endangered language, which I cannot pronounce. There are only 2 people in this world who speak it. They live 500 meters away from each other and refuse to speak to each other. Right, that's what that text was about, but I can't remember how to pronounce that. Okay, so if you know how to pronounce the name of that language, please make a comment below. I'd love to hear. Okay, right, but that is simply the idea. I've done this a lot, and the students really enjoy engaging on the world map. So this is an activity that is still part of the Save the Endangered Languages reading piece. Now they have engaged with the vocabulary, they have read the text, they have listened to the text, they have watched videos. Now they have to reflect and make personal connections. So this activity, I use the blackboard, so I'll pull up the blackboard. There we go, I'll cut into the blackboard and I will hand out. Each of the students have got their own individual blackboard, and they can then type, and then the idea is to give them, maybe use the timer, okay, and we're going to give them 2 minutes to reflect and write down why should we save endangered languages and how can we save endangered languages from extinction. Here is another example of an activity you can do in class in very easy and quickly to set up. Basically, it's a pre-reading activity. The story they're about to read is about an alien who visits Earth and wants to learn how to save their planet from deforestation and desertification. Big words. And this is a nice lead-in activity. So basically what they need to do, as you can see on the screen, is pick a block and draw what you think an alien looks like, right? And then they get to read the story, which is a very interesting and sweet little story. Now, another vocabulary exercise on the same reading text. This one, what you will do is you will take out the dice, and you will then, one student will roll the dice, boom, 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 it's number 2. Okay, right, and the student will say, what is a helmet? And student B will match, and then say, a helmet is a protective head covering. Right, so now they're reading the definition and they're connecting it to a picture. So word, definition, and picture. You're engaging both your kinesthetic, your visual, and your auditory student in this activity. If you want your students to engage with the vocabulary more and you want to know whether they can relate to the pictures, talk about the pictures in their own words, this is a very nice activity. So what we'll do is we'll bring out the stopwatch and we'll say, okay, right, I want you to explain all 6 pictures and let's see who can do it the fastest. Stop the stopwatch, and a desert is, a planet is, an alien is, a spaceship is. Very nice activity, and they get very competitive. Right, post-reading, real-life connections. This is an activity you just grab the screen off the PPT, add in a little bit to give it some flair. Right, so you will ask the student to pick a picture. So, say for example, the student picks that picture, right? So then they say, what is it? It's sunlight, right? So then you'll find the word sunlight and then bring it down. A planet requires sunlight. Complete the sentence. I think sunlight is important because plants can't grow without sunlight. And then you'll go through all the words in that fashion. And talking about natural resources and fresh water and oxygen, and it's a nice free talk, structured activity, making real life connections. Then we get to our wrap-up activity, and we need to sequence the story and put in order what we've learned in this lesson. So one of the things they had to learn was what is desertification, what causes a land to become desert, right? So here we would say, first, people use up all the water. Then they cut down too many trees. After that, the land dries up. Finally, we have desertification. Once again, using sequencing words, and I also drew the desertification definition of a dictionary so that they can read it and know exactly what it means as well. It's a very big word, but again, this is also for your high-level students. Right, so we visited Class In, we looked at some of the activities on the Class In platform, we played with the dice, we pulled out the blackboard, and we used some of the timers and the responders. Just to recap, you can use the timer in your Blackboard activities to give them 2 minutes to write down their thoughts or to do certain activities, to draw a picture. You can use the stopwatch to describe vocabulary, as much of the vocabulary as you can, and then whoever has the fastest time gets a prize. Random picker for reading, and what I like to do as well is, especially if I have a long text, I let the students read 2 sentences each or 1 sentence each, so they tag read, and this keeps them engaged. They're shadow reading, and it helps them focus on the text. Otherwise, one student reads, the rest zone out, and they don't focus. Here we have the selector, nice for Q&A, or A and B for true and false. Once again, dice, so many things you can use it for. Responder, very nice for Q&As, and blackboards, almost a must for your reflective activities. Right, so that's just a little bit of the Class In tools that you can use, and you can definitely use at least 3, 4 tools in every lesson if you just think a bit out of the box. And that's a wrap. We've come to the end of our first training for 2021. Thank you for visiting my channel. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope that you've learned something. If you have learned something, if you've taken something home from this, if you found it interesting, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love your feedback. And thank you very much, Learning Education, for the opportunity to present this tutorial. It's been fun, and I want to wish all the teachers all the best of luck and happy teaching for 2021. I am Simmy, this is Class in the Cloud. Goodbye.